Getting up in the morning and your spouse tells you the breakfast is half-digested moss from a reindeer's stomach, freshly cracked bone marrow still steaming with blood, roasted tortoise meat scooped straight from the shell. It sounds like a sick joke. But for the Neanderthals, this was not a dare, not a punishment. It was breakfast. And sometimes dinner too. Imagine waking in a shelter made of mammoth bones and hides, your breath visible in the freezing air. Outside, the wind tears across the Ice Age plains, carrying the scent of smoke from last night's fire. Your family sits close to the flames, waiting for the first meal of the day. Your partner crouches beside a pit in the snow where yesterday's hunt lies butchered. But it's not just meat on the menu. A stomach is pulled open to reveal the soft green mash inside, plants already chewed and partly digested by the animal. It's warm, it's packed with nutrients, and in this world, that makes it food. Nearby, an elder cracks open the skull of a giant deer. Inside, the brain glistens like pale butter. It's scooped out with a flint blade and passed around. A child gnaws on a strip of boiled hide, soft enough to chew but still as tough as leather. Someone tosses a charred tortoise onto the snow and smashes it open, the smell of roasted fat spilling into the cold air. This was the reality of Neanderthal life. A menu built on necessity, not preference. They ate whatever the land, the rivers, and the kill could provide. If it could keep them alive, it was worth chewing, sucking, swallowing. And yet, the more we study their campsites, the more we realize this was not just about hunger. It was a way of life shaped by ingenuity, desperation, and a view of food unlike anything in our modern world. Because hidden in the ashes of their hearths and the scraps of their kill sites is a record of meals so strange, so unexpected, that even the hungriest among us might hesitate. This is the story of the weirdest things the Neanderthals ever ate. And it begins here, in the biting cold, with breakfast.
Long before the first cities, before the first plowed fields or domesticated animals, the earth belonged to the Neanderthals. They walked a world that could kill a human in hours if they weren't prepared. It was a world sculpted by ice and wind, where survival was measured not in years, but in days, sometimes even in meals. They lived across Europe, Western Asia, and into the Middle East, a range stretching from the warm Mediterranean coasts to the deep frozen tundras of what is now Siberia. But the land they knew best was one of extremes. In the height of summer, rolling plains turned gold under the sun, full of grazing reindeer and wild horses. In winter, that same land became a white desert, silent except for the howl of wolves and the groan of ice. The glaciers that covered much of the north were like frozen oceans, grinding slowly forward, swallowing valleys, crushing forests, and leaving behind scarred landscapes. Between those glaciers and the southern grassland stretched vast belts of tundra and steppe, open country with little shelter, where the wind could strip the warmth from your body before nightfall. Food was never guaranteed. The herds that roamed the plains, mammoth, bison, giant deer, were always on the move, following invisible paths known only to them. Hunting them took patience, teamwork, and luck. Even then, a single slip, a sudden shift in the wind, could send the animals thundering away, leaving the hunters with nothing. The Neanderthals were strong, stocky, built for endurance. Their bodies burned energy quickly, and in the cold, that meant eating was not just a need, it was a constant battle. The muscles and fat of an animal could keep them going, but the Ice Age demanded more. Fatty organs, marrow, brains, and even the half-digested food inside a prey's stomach became vital sources of nutrition. We know this not from guesswork, but from the earth itself. Archaeologists have uncovered Neanderthal hearths where charred animal bones lie in thick layers, the ends split open by stone hammers to release the marrow. Sites like Moulagursi Cave in France show bones of deer and even other humans, bearing cut marks identical to those made during butchery, evidence that in desperate times, Neanderthals turned to cannibalism. At El Sidrón in Spain, the remains of at least a dozen Neanderthals were found with similar marks, the ribs, long bones, and skulls open for their marrow and brains. And yet, those same sites reveal traces of starchy grains and edible plants preserved in the plaque of their teeth, proof that they were far more flexible and resourceful than the old image of them as purely meat-eaters. They cooked when they could. Burned seeds from wild legumes, roasted pine nuts, and the shells of freshwater mussels have been found in campfires across their range. They smoked meat to make it last. They even used ash, rubbing it on meat to preserve it or eating it in small amounts for its minerals. Everything about their diet tells us the same thing: to live as a Neanderthal was to eat without the boundaries of taste or habit. If it could be chewed, swallowed, and digested, it had a place at the fire. And that's why, when we step into the story of the meals they ate, we find a menu that seems more like a dare than a diet, and yet, for them, it was simply life. The first light of morning was a faint smear on the horizon, pale gold struggling against the deep blue of the Ice Age sky. The cold was absolute, the kind that crept into the bones and lingered. The Neanderthal camp stirred slowly within the shelter of an overhanging cliff, the ground covered in layers of hide and fur boughs. A young male, no older than 20 winters, was the first to leave the warmth of the fire. He stepped out into the snow, his breath curling in the air. The memory of hunger from the night before pushed him forward toward yesterday's kill, a reindeer, half buried in snow to keep scavengers away. The meat was stiff, almost frozen, but that was not what he was after. He reached for the head. With a stone hammer, he struck hard at the skull, again and again, until the bone fractured. Inside lay the brain, a creamy, fatty mass that glistened in the dim light. To the Neanderthals, this was more than food, it was concentrated survival. He scooped a handful into his mouth. It was warm, oily, and rich, its taste unlike any muscle meat. Inside the shelter, an older woman was tending to the reindeer's stomach. The hide had been slit open to reveal a greenish mash, the half-digested mosses, lichens, and grasses the animal had eaten before death. In a world where edible plants were buried under snow for months, this was a rare and valuable find. She divided the contents into small portions, handing them to the children, who ate without hesitation. 2 men returned from the riverbank, their arms heavy with mussels gathered from beneath the ice. Their fingers were raw from breaking through, but the shells were worth it. Tossed into the embers, they hissed and popped until they gaped open. The briny scent filled the air, mingling with the smell of roasting meat. A third hunter arrived with something stranger still, a tortoise, buried months earlier in a snow pit. This was a living storehouse, a way to preserve food without it spoiling. Now, it was roasted whole until the shell cracked apart, revealing soft, rich meat inside. The day's feast continued with the arrival of a rabbit caught in a snare. Every part of it was used, the skin boiled to soften it, the meat roasted over the fire, the bones cracked for marrow, the sinew chewed until it could be swallowed. And then, as if the day could not grow more unusual, a group of children arrived carrying a frozen fox. It had been found near the tree line, likely killed by another predator. The marrow in its bones was still edible, and the tribe wasted no time in breaking them open. The smell of the camp shifted through the day: oily brain, sour stomach grass, sweet roasted tortoise, briny mussels, earthy boiled hide. To modern senses, it would be an assault. To them, it was the scent of security. By late afternoon, the hunters returned from the plains dragging the frozen carcass of a hyena. This was not the result of a direct hunt. It had likely died from injury or starvation. But its fat and meat would still serve. The hide was stripped, the bones saved for later, the meat cut into manageable portions. Some would be boiled immediately, others buried in snow for the days ahead. When the sun sank, the tribe gathered around the fire. Every bite was eaten slowly, deliberately. Nothing was wasted. The bones would become tools, the hides would become clothing, and the scraps would be stored for leaner days. The Ice Age had no concept of delicacy or disgust. In this world, food was food. And on this day, it had been a strange but abundant one. Day 2, the fermented feast. Morning broke under a sky heavy with snow. Flakes drifted down in slow spirals, muffling every sound on the plains. The cold was sharper today, the kind that bit through hides and numbed the hands in minutes. Hunger pressed against the camp again, the kind of steady pressure that was never fully gone. The hunters left at first light, their silhouettes swallowed by the white horizon. The rest of the group stayed near the fire, conserving energy. An elder woman began working on something strange, a bundle wrapped in hide, buried weeks earlier in the frozen ground. When she unwrapped it, the smell rolled through the cave, sharp, sour, almost rotten. It was fermented meat, a preservation technique as old as the cold itself. Left to age beneath the frost, the fibers had broken down, making it easier to chew and digest. The flavor was powerful, but it was packed with energy, and in the Ice Age, that mattered more than taste. Midday brought the hunters back with a curious prize, a pair of birds, one an owl, the other a raven. The feathers were plucked, the skin singed over the fire to remove the last down. The meat was small, but even a mouthful of protein was worth the effort. Bones were cracked afterward to get at the rich marrow within. From the river, 2 young boys returned with a basket woven from willow branches, dripping with freshwater snails. Their shells were boiled until they split, revealing the soft bodies inside. The meat was small, barely more than a bite each, but dozens of them together became a meal. As the day ended, a single hunter arrived carrying what at first looked like a bundle of sticks. It was the frozen leg of a horse, scavenged from a predator's kill. The meat was scraped away, and the bones were roasted in the fire until the marrow inside liquefied, dripping into the snow like molten fat. The marrow was scooped up quickly, passed from hand to hand. That night, the camp fell silent under the drifting snow. The remains of the day's meal, bird bones, snail shells, empty marrow husks, lay in neat piles outside the shelter, already freezing solid for later use. Day 3, the mammoth fat. The third day began with hunger sharper than before. The wind howled down from the mountains, carrying with it a cold so deep it seemed to steal the breath from the lungs. The hunters were already gone when the rest of the camp stirred. By mid-morning, a discovery was made, the frozen body of a deer, half buried in snow and picked over by wolves. To a modern eye, it was spoiled. To the Neanderthals, it was a gift from the ice. The remaining meat was carved away, the bones collected. The stomach was split open, and once again the green slurry of half-digested plants was scraped into pouches. But the day's strangest meal came later. From a pit dug deep into the frozen earth, an elder pulled out a bundle that had been waiting for months, fat rendered down from a mammoth, stored in a bladder. The fat had solidified into a pale, waxy block. It was sliced into thin strips and eaten raw. The energy it provided was immediate, spreading warmth through the body. Near dusk, the hunters returned with another surprise, a set of human bones. Whether the body had been from an enemy, a member of another group, or even one of their own who had died in the cold, there was no telling. But the marks on the bone were unmistakable, scraped clean with stone tools, the marrow cracked open and eaten. It was not ritual. It was survival. The fire burned long into the night. Outside, the bones from all 3 days lay frozen in the snow, silent witnesses to the fact that, for the Neanderthals, food was not defined by what was appetizing, but by what could keep the body alive one more day. Day 4, the honey raid. The morning came heavy with mist, the air thick and damp, clinging to hair and fur like icy fingers. The hunters had set out early, but not for the usual quarry. Their path cut through a stretch of birch and pine, where the scent of sap and old wood lingered in the fog. They stopped at a massive pine, its trunk scarred by claw marks from years of bears climbing after the same prize the Neanderthals sought today, honey. High above, in a hollow darkened by resin, bees hummed in a restless swarm. In summer, this would have been madness. But now, the cold made the bees sluggish, their buzzing slow and lazy. With flint tools, one of the hunters began hacking into the trunk, sending splinters flying. The hollow split open, revealing the combs inside, thick slabs heavy with honey and fat white larvae. The honey glistened gold in the dim light, and the larvae squirmed faintly, alive but weak from the cold. The combs were torn free, pieces breaking and sticking to hands. Honey dripped in slow rivulets, freezing in place within minutes. The larvae were eaten on the spot, soft, creamy, rich in fat and protein. The honey, too precious to waste, was scooped into hide pouches, its sweetness a rare gift in a world of salt and meat. By the time they returned to camp, the mist had frozen into delicate crystals on their hair. The honey was melted over the fire, drizzled onto roasted strips of hide to soften them, transforming the tough leather into something sweet, strange, and far more edible. Day 5, the predator's kill. Snow was falling in slow, lazy spirals when the hunters found it. A half-eaten bison carcass, ribs torn open, its spine twisted, steam still rising from the torn flesh. The paw prints of cave lions circled the body, their size and depth a clear warning. But the lions were gone now, driven away by something unseen, or perhaps resting close by. Either way, the hunters moved quickly. The meat left behind was ragged, clawed, and frozen in places, but it was still food. With flint blades, they carved away chunks, tossing them into skin sacks. They didn't just take the meat. The lions had left the stomach untouched. Inside was a thick mash of chewed grasses and herbs, tinged with blood. It smelled sharp, almost medicinal. In their world, this was not waste. This was ready-made plant matter, already broken down for digestion. Back at camp, the meat was smoked over low flames, the stomach contents boiled into a thin, bitter broth. It wasn't pleasant, but it was warm, and warmth mattered more than taste. That night, as the snow fell heavier, the hunters kept watch, knowing the lions might follow the scent back to their camp. Day 6, the bone boil. The cold deepened. Hunting became harder. The camp turned to what was left, bones piled high outside the shelter, stripped of most of their meat but still heavy with promise. The bones were smashed with stone hammers, the marrow scooped out where it was still soft. But the frozen, brittle ones were placed directly into a pot of boiling water, a carved-out stone heated with fire and filled with snow until it melted. The boiling freed the last of the fat, turning the water into a cloudy, greasy broth. The broth was drunk slowly, each sip coating the mouth with warmth. Into the pot went strips of pine bark, scraped from young trees. The inner layer, soft and sweet when boiled, provided a surprising bite of carbohydrate. As the pot simmered, the smell of pine filled the shelter, mingling with the earthy scent of bone fat. It was not a meal to celebrate, but it kept them alive. The woolly rhinoceros escalation. The 4th day after the bone boil began with a sky so clear it felt unnatural. The wind had gone still, leaving the plains silent except for the groan of shifting ice in the distance. The air was so cold that the snow underfoot didn't crunch, it squeaked, brittle and dry. By now, the camp supplies were low. The scraps from the earlier days were nearly gone. The hunters set out again, fanning across the frozen land in search of anything that could be eaten. Hours passed. The sun barely shifted in the sky. And then, just before dusk, a pair of them returned carrying something that made even the elders pause. It was the bloated, frozen carcass of a woolly rhinoceros. The animal had likely fallen through river ice weeks before and been trapped there, preserved by the cold. Its skin was thick and leathery, its smell faintly sour, but inside was a treasure trove of fat and protein. The skin was too tough to cut cleanly, so they used stone scrapers to peel it away in thick sheets. The muscle beneath was icy and rigid, but still rich with color. As they worked deeper, they uncovered the organs, the liver dark and dense, the kidneys small and pale, the heart massive and heavy in the hands. Each was divided up carefully, cooked when possible, eaten raw when not. But the strangest discovery was yet to come. In the folds of the rhino's stomach lining, they found a thick yellow-green paste, a mix of partially digested plants and the rhino's own fat, churned together by the beast's last meals. To modern eyes, it would be unthinkable. To the Neanderthals, it was a rare blend of energy-rich plant matter and nutrients their own frozen world denied them. The mixture was scooped into hide bowls, passed around, and eaten slowly, as if honoring the fact that the animal had given them more than just meat, it had given them a few more days of life. That night, the fire burned bright against the black sky. The tribe sat close, silent except for the sound of chewing. The bones of the rhino lay piled in the snow, already freezing, waiting for the next time hunger would demand they be split open for marrow. The Neanderthals did not call it strange. They called it food. And in their world, that was enough. By the time the fire had burned down to a bed of glowing coals, the camp was quiet. The only movement came from the smoke twisting upward and disappearing into the cold night air. The day's strange meal, the woolly rhinoceros, the organs, the greenish stomach paste, had filled every stomach. But in this world, satisfaction was a fragile thing. The bones from the rhino were stacked neatly near the cave entrance, some still warm from the fire, others already hardening in the frost. By morning, they would be ready to crack open for marrow. The sheets of skin that had been stripped from the carcass were stretched out on snow to freeze dry, later to be softened over the fire and eaten or cut into strips for lashing hides together. Even the sinew was saved, pulled in long fibers that could be chewed for food or used as cordage. The elders sat close to the fire, their bodies wrapped in furs, eyes reflecting the glow. To them, there was nothing unusual in what they had eaten. The rhino's stomach contents, the fermented meat from days before, the boiled hides, the roasted tortoise, these were simply the logic of survival. Outside the shelter, a pair of hunters kept watch. The scent of such a large kill carried far across the snowfields. Hyenas, wolves, and even other human groups could come searching. The kill site where they'd found the rhino was still open on the plains, and in this land, nothing was left unclaimed for long. Over the next 2 days, the rhino was stripped bare. The larger bones were roasted over coals until the fat bubbled from within, dripping into the snow where it hardened instantly. That fat was scraped up and stored, a concentrated source of warmth for the cold weeks ahead. The skull was smashed open, the brain consumed quickly before it could freeze solid. The organs, rich with vitamins, were eaten in thin slices, the flavor strong, almost bitter. By the end, nothing remained of the rhino except a scatter of splintered bones and the faint outline of where it had lain in the snow. The stomach paste was gone, the marrow gone, the hide turned into strips and rope. For the Neanderthals, this was not a feast they would remember for its strangeness. It was one they would remember because it had carried them forward through another stretch of deadly cold. They had lived another week. In the Ice Age, that was everything. When we think about our distant relatives, the Neanderthals, it's tempting to imagine them only as hunters of great beasts, the mammoth chasers, the reindeer stalkers, the Ice Age warriors. But their survival was built on something more complicated, more relentless. It was built on an unbreakable commitment to use every possible source of nourishment, no matter how strange it seemed. What they ate was a mirror of their world. A world where the seasons could lock the earth in ice for months, where plants were scarce, where a failed hunt could mean the death of a child or elder. In that world, roasted tortoise was a gift. Mussels pulled from under river ice were treasure. The stomach contents of a reindeer or rhinoceros were not revolting, they were life itself. Every strange meal they consumed carried the same truth: survival had no room for pride or preference. It demanded adaptability. It demanded an understanding of the land so deep that nothing edible was overlooked. We know this now because their camps, their tools, and even the residue on their teeth tell the story. Every fragment of burned bone, every discarded shell, every scraped skull is a record of choices made under pressure, choices that kept their groups alive for hundreds of thousands of years. And in a way, part of them lives on in us. Many of us carry fragments of Neanderthal DNA. That means the resilience, the resourcefulness, the ability to survive in the face of scarcity. It's not just their story. It's ours. The weird things the Neanderthals ate were not quirks of taste. They were the hard currency of survival. And if the Ice Age came again tomorrow, we might find ourselves looking at food the same way they did. If you think this was strange, you haven't heard the half of it. Because long before the Neanderthals, our ancestors, and even species unlike our own, were eating things far beyond survival. Meals that weren't just about staying alive, but about belief, ritual, and power. Foods chosen not because they were available, but because they were feared, or worshipped. There are sites buried deep in ancient soil where the remains of meals hint at ceremonies so strange, so unsettling, that archaeologists still argue about their meaning. If you want to know what happened when food became a weapon, a warning, and a doorway into the unknown, then you need to see the next story. Like, subscribe, and share so these truths don't disappear into the ice. And prepare yourself, the next prehistoric meal will change the way you think about the past forever.